So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this 5th webinar in the SONNET Webinar Series. My name is Adrienne and I will be moderating this discussion. So I'll walk you through very briefly what SONNET is and what this webinar series is all about as a way to sort of kick things off. So to begin with this, apologies, there's a fly in front of me. To begin with, this webinar is going to focus on the concept of energy sufficiency. It is absolutely okay if you have never heard this concept before. We're going to go into all of the details for you and really focusing on how we can bring a concept like that from really being the focus of local projects to global drivers. I will tell you a little bit about the platform we're using to make sure that you are able to interact with us over chat and through questions. And then I will pass the floor over to two great speakers who we have, who are both from the city of Grenoble, which is the city that we are spotlighting today. And they'll discuss a bit more about this concept, how it's being applied on the ground in Grenoble, and also some questions we have for the future and for making sure it can be an impactful concept with respect to policy. Then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers, so please do make note of questions as we go, include them in our questions tab, and also there'll be opportunities for you to unmute yourselves if you'd like to discuss. And once we're done the entire discussion, we are very pleased to have Arthur Hinch on the line with us, who works with a different European project called PowerPour, who will summarize some of the main ideas and discussion points from the last hour and a half of discussion, and then also present how it's relevant in other contexts, including from the perspective of energy poverty, which is the topic that his project focuses on. So to begin with, for those of you who do not know what this format is, this GoToWebinar format, you should all have something like a little control panel on the side of your screen. So please feel free to use that to help interact with us. However, you should know that this webinar is recorded and we will be putting the recording on YouTube and on our website. So please feel free to make use of the question section if you'd like to ask questions anonymously. Those questions will not be shared publicly. However, if you'd like to unmute yourself, please do so knowing that we will be recording and posting this recording. And to interact with us using the platform, you can see there's a little questions tab here. You can feel free to write questions there, and then all of our organizers can respond. My colleagues Olga and Nicholas are on the line as well. They're also from the SONNET project, and they'd be very pleased to either respond to your question directly or filter it through to the speakers during the discussion section. And when we get into the discussion section, you can also click this button. I believe you should all have it, to raise your hand, and then that will allow us to unmute you if you'd like to give your question to us. So I'm just going to speak for really one very brief moment to provide some context on this webinar series and this project. We are brought to you by the SONNET project, which stands for Social Innovations and Energy Transition. We're a project that's Horizon 2020 funded. So in other words, it's funded by the European Commission. And what we're trying to do is look at energy transitions, not from the technological perspective, not considering new technologies and new innovations from that perspective, but rather social innovation. So new ways that people are organizing themselves and new ways that people are organizing social interactions to try to help us get to a renewable energy future. And one of the ways we're doing that is through 6 different city labs throughout Europe. And today's webinar is going to focus on the city lab in Grenoble, which is the city lab that's really testing and putting into practice this concept of energy sufficiency. So we are going to begin with a quick poll to try to get an idea of what exactly level of understanding about this concept we have among attendees. So I've just launched the poll. Hopefully all of our attendees should be able to see that now. So please take a moment to let us know how much expertise you have, and this can also shape a bit how much time we spend on the various parts of our presentation. Wonderful. So now 2/3 of our attendees have voted. So I'll wait just one brief moment and then we can close the poll. And needless to say, it is absolutely okay if you have a lot of expertise or none at all. We will provide the background information to ensure everyone can engage well in the discussion. All right, I'll wait just 5 more seconds and then I will close this poll. All right, so now I must admit, I'm not sure exactly if you are also able to see the results, but what we have is about 1/3 of our participants, 31%. Aha, share results. Here we go. Quite a few people on the line actually have quite a bit of expertise, which I think will be good knowledge for other speakers to know that the concept is relatively well understood among this group. However, we still have almost 40% who need a bit more background in order to engage with all of the details that we'll be bringing up along the way. So I think that with that in mind, I would like to take a chance to introduce our main speakers today. We have 2 main speakers who will be guiding you through this discussion of energy sufficiency. The first one is Monsieur Vincent Christot, who's the Deputy Mayor for Energy Transitions and Municipal Buildings at the City of Grenoble. And he'll be discussing the concept a little bit, as well as some of the experiences of the city. And his counterpart for this discussion will be Mr. Fabien Dupré, who is a key member of our SONNET team. He's leading SONNET City Lab in Grenoble, but he's also the project manager for the City of Grenoble, focusing on energy sufficiency and carbon footprinting. So without further ado, I will mute myself and turn off my video and pass the floor off to Monsieur Christot and Monsieur Dupré to give you launch into the crux of our discussion here.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to speak about Grenoble, 160 inhabitants, 1,000 inhabitants city in the Alps. Few words of introduction about me. I'm in charge of energy transition policies in Grenoble, mainly on municipal buildings, but also public lighting, service fleet of vehicles, for example. Grenoble is an active city in environmental policies. We warm up twice faster than average with the climate because in the mountains it's cold in winter and very hot in summer. We are labeled EEA at the gold level, European Energy Award. Eric Piolle, the first mayor from the Green Party in a large city in France. He was elected 7 years ago. And next year, in 22, Grenoble will be European Green Capital. It was awarded by the European Commission. First, let's talk about energy sufficiency. I can illustrate sufficiency, a large number of examples with a size well adapted to actual use. For cars, for example, for TV screens, it's obvious. For heating too. If you choose a ceiling of 19 degrees for the heat, or if you switch off unused devices, use returnable bottles, repair devices near working order, it's less waste, less precious metals or rare minerals. For mobility too, carpooling, car sharing, avoid using car with bicycle travels. All these examples, all the best practices reduce energy demand, reduce CO2 emissions. Sufficiency can be desirable. Of course, we can discover other things, a different tempo of life, less in a hurry, close to people, close to nature, more safety when you speak about speed on highways. If you can share surfaces of buildings, rooms, it's possible. Keywords for sufficiency are just sizing, good level and duration of operations, and sharing by collective organization. Next slide. In France, it's a Negawatt Association who popularized sufficiency 20 years ago with several release of energy scenarios, including sufficiency and efficiency to reduce energy demand. That's what we can see on the right of the slide. It's a projection perspective for energy demand on 50 years in 2050. And you can see that the reduction is possible with sufficiency, sobriété in French, and efficiency. Efficiency is well known, is the loss of reduction, is the loss for, sorry, you reduce loss with more energy, more efficient technologies. For example, LEDs for lighting, electrical engine for mobility. You can also insulate buildings. It's efficiency. And sufficiency weighs twice compared with efficiency. It's question of choice. Choices, car size, screen size, take train or train and not plane for holidays. It's also duration or dimming of light. When you develop strategy in sufficiency and efficiency, you reduce energy demands, and it's possible now to provide by renewable energies the demand which left. Next slide. In Grenoble, next slide, please. Yes, in Grenoble, local communities apply climate and energy policies with a territorial climate plan. A long time work give good results for more 600 public buildings of the municipality of Grenoble. We are proud to reach a reduction by 50% of the carbon emission in 15 years. It's possible with a precise daily monitoring of energy consumption, or where we insulate schools, public buildings. We have a milestone, a political milestone. In 2040, we want to be a carbon neutral city in Grenoble. And the next slide. In fact, we went to wide scope and consider the carbon footprint, not only energy impact. We study for the city public utilities the carbon footprint, and we can see on the chart, in fact, energy is a small share of total carbon footprint, because products and services are near 50% of the footprint in red. Transport of municipal staff, waste also. Public who attend cultural buildings is also a significant part. It shows we need to include carbon criterion in a public procurement. We have also actions to reduce usage. For example, consumption monitoring, I already mentioned, and organic food in canteen for schools, and responsible procurement. Fabien, it's to you.
Okay. Hello everyone. Thank you, Mr. Fristo, for this presentation. I will now provide you some details about on the sufficiency actions tested during the Grenoble City Lab within the SONNET project, and also barriers and difficulties we face, how we deal with it, or how we try to deal with it. So the Grenoble City Lab focuses on energy sufficiency in municipal buildings. Those municipal buildings, for energy consumption, it represents 62 million kilowatt per hour, 9,000 tons CO2 equivalent. So it's 15% of our carbon footprint. Mr. Fristo just introduced the slide on the previous slide. And it's about 7 million euros for expenditures, plus also the consumptions of water. I haven't precised, but so we focus on energy consumption in those buildings, but also with a perspective of overall eco-responsibility. So during the SONNET project, we try to develop new actions for saving energy, and we try also to keep a wider goal. It's to move from individualized support to the generalization of practices led by an active community, because so far we are more working on energy sufficiency with individual coaching, individual support. But because we have a lot of buildings, a lot of civil servants, we have this wider goal. So first during this city lab, we tried to work on the methodology to develop a method inspired by several energy management approaches implemented by different institutions. So we try to define an ideal accompanying action for one building with different steps. First, to clarify the challenges and objectives of the process with users, to identify a contact, an interlocutor, to have some data collection about the building, consumptions, existing problems, to have to do a diagnosis and an assessment about the building, and have a co-construction of an action plan with users, not just to be in this approach, not to propose already made solutions, but really to make this with users, because it's them who are living in the building every day. After that, there is a phase of monitoring of the implementation of the action plan, and after restitution and evaluation. So for this theoretical methodology, we try also to have some moments of information and awareness, and to take into consideration the contributions of social psychology to improve our method. And when I talk about this about social psychology, I mean because there are different steps to change the behavior, and we already worked with several experts on this topic to help us, because we are more coming from the technical energy sector. But this is just theoretical. And every time we work on one building with users, we try to adapt this methodology to the context. And so, as you will see just the next slide, it's, let's say, all actions are very different. So for the Sonnet City Lab, we work on 3 main targets in 2021, just right now. So it's in progress. So with associations occupying city buildings, with civil servants, administrative buildings, and with schools. So for associations, we already tried an approach of energy diagnosis previous seasons for 5 buildings per season with an average reduction of 10% of energy consumption. But it was really depending on buildings and what we could really do directly with them. And right now we are testing, experimenting an association and city co-commitment charter for eco-responsibility. So because there are 330 associations who are using city buildings. So in this context of provision of buildings, we propose, for the moment we test this charter with 6 associations, and they have to choose some commitments which can be on, let's say, associations member commitment on eco-responsible events, on travels, on goods and services, on energy consumption. And when they have chosen some commitments, they have to traduce it to an action plan. And when we will have finished this test phase, the wider project is to propose a generalization of this commitment for associations, but by involving also by involving other city departments, our colleagues who are working in a culture, sport, territorial action departments, and we really work daily with associations. They are in contact with them because we need really their help to work with all associations. For civil servants, we already had several actions about eco gesture display, broadcasting on our intranet, etc. And during Sonnet, we focus on one building. The name of the building is Claudel, and it's a grouping of various services who were using different old buildings, and right now all those services are entering this building. And so we are displaying eco-friendly gestures in different locations, and we conceived a nudge to encourage people to take stairs instead of elevators. So it's with 2 parts, those indications on the floor you can see on the left, and with several displays focused on health, on energy, on motivation, so with different arguments. And for school users, there is an action already existing. The name is Positive Energy Schools Challenge, and it's already conducted in 5 schools per year with one local partner, an energy agency who works on the territory of the Grenoble metropole. But for the Sonnet project, we're experimenting with specialized agents who work for the city for maintenance, cleaning, catering, canteen in the school and nursery, based on observation of their daily practices. We are working on several supports. One best practices guide, specific eco display gestures, for example, for lighting, for heating system. And also our challenge is to empower them, to make them more vigilant on malfunctions, and that they can become relay to other users and other schools. So all those actions we are in progress, and our goal is to evaluate them before the end of summer. with the help of Grenoble École de Management, who is our local partner in the SONNET project. And after, to see how we can use those results to continue to progress in the Grenoble administration to generalize some practices. So we also meet some barriers for this subject of energy sufficiency. So there are a lot of cultural issues. The behavior change process can be very long. So let's say the energy for cultural issues, I would say that energy sufficiency is generally considered as one issue among others, and so that's why sometimes it's difficult to convince that it should be a priority. And however, this topic is well received by open-minded environment, but because Grenoble is politically engaged in ecological transition for a long time. A lot of buildings are quite old, and there is poor energy efficiency in general in buildings. Even if there are several schools renovated every year, but because we have more than 600 buildings, we are still in lack of means to renovate enough. And managerial issues, it's more to introduce the fact that energy sufficiency for the moment is not really, on my opinion, carried by the general management, but more the actions that have been taken so far have been done by the energy management. But as we will see after, it's changing. So we deal with those barriers by trying different approaches, by it being help from contributions of social psychology, trying to identify relay persons, and by following up and intensifying ongoing actions. So we also appeal more and more to, I mean, this is more generally, I think we appeal more and more to the unconscious by doing a solution as nudges, because on this subject of energy sufficiency, we can fear to offend someone, but on my opinion, that applies to problems in the hierarchy of priorities. But I think we should really try all different approaches, but by being careful not to focus only on this kind of solution like nudges. And also, I think this a barrier to this, let's say, managerial issues is that to treat this concept politically of energy sufficiency, it requires to confronting the distributive question. I mean by when we talk about sufficiency, we know we all have to reduce our carbon footprint, but in a wide society, we will have to ask who wins, who loses, and who have to start first. I'm trying to go to next slide. Okay. Yeah, just a point on the most impactful individual actions, because we talk about carbon footprint. It's an extract of a French study of those individual actions, and from what we can see on this chart is that from the most to the least impactful, we have a traduction on the right. So the bigger action is to eat less meat or to become vegetarian, to use bike for short trips, carpooling, etc., etc. And the energy actions are coming more at the end, but that it can be contradictory with our city lab, but for our city administration, we already have a commitment for energy consumption. So we try to enter by this door, let's say, on energy consumption, and to convince users we work with on this topic, also to take into consideration all their individual actions. So I've also mentioned this the part about having one fewer child. I mean, generally, it's not in all publications about eco gesture, but for me, it seems important to tell that this it can be known, even if this topic is quite sensitive, and it's also asking the question of inheritance, of emission responsibility, and it should be carried by our governments. I mean, we cannot really convince everyone to have one fewer child, but for the figures, it can be interesting. This 58 ton CO2 per year, it's coming from one study, the climate mitigation, gap education, and government recommendations, etc. So after that, just about this carbon footprint, there is one, yeah, I've added one picture. I mean, it's not really, I mean, I don't know if you can see correctly, but just to say that those most individual, most impactful actions can really depends on the countries, because as I said, the energy part is really a few, but in other countries in which the energy production is emitting more CO2, it can be quite different. So in France, we are the average, it's 1 ton CO2 equivalent per person and per year. And so, but we all have, as European countries, to reach the 2 ton per year to reach the carbon neutrality goal. So, but some countries are starting from, let's say, have a bigger objective and a bigger gap to do. And to finish my presentation, I would say that for energy sufficiency and generally eco gestures, eco responsibility could be criticized, and I think this criticism can be legitimate because of greenwashing made by a lot of organizations, some injunctions, inequalities in living standards, and it can be also considered that the individual commitment for eco-responsibility, I mean, we can wonder if it's not an excuse or response to political inaction, but eco-friendly actions and as a result, individualized support can have a direct or indirect impact on our end-to-edge by social norms, because we are, let's say, we are really, I mean, social norms are central in our decisions, and those actions can have a contagion effect, and we can hope to reach social tipping points. Generally, we consider that between 10 and 40% of the, if between 10 and 40% of the population is doing one action, it can start to be generalized by others. It can have an impact on our own political commitment, because several studies show a slightly positive correlation, an attraction between individual eco-responsibility and individual politic or civic commitment, and it can have an impact also on the legitimacy of climate policies, because we can consider that it's surely preferable that some citizens have already taken action before those climate engagements. So to conclude, I would say that to act on the scale of the climate emergency, collective transformation action is also essential. So I would ask two questions to introduce the next discussions and answers. So why is sufficiency not at the center of territorial public policies, and why do we focus mainly on one-off actions and not on the implementation of strong measures as compulsory training, as putting energy sufficiency in organization, in job descriptions, etc. And wouldn't the real innovation rather than the fun, small-step individual support as nudges, be that the organization take up this subject in a more ambitious way. So, Mr. Fuisto, I will let you continue for the next slide.
Yes, in 2 minutes to end our presentation. Elected representative in Grenoble decided to a set of action, a roadmap for CO2 long-term reduction with long-term vision, long-term policies. We applied European Energy Awards and obtained the gold levels. We highlighted cross-public policies. It's very important to be transversal with urban planning, more sufficient in energy, more sufficient for mobility. For example, fresh, green, vegetalized public spaces. We also associate citizens in debates for urban design, for planning future neighborhood or residential area. We are setting up a carbon account approach. It's a new point of view for the projects. And we also encourage, decide large meetings or events with thousands of participants, with the Biennale of Cities in Transition, with Green Capital in 2022, for example. And the last slide. In conclusion, I would like to say it's important to go further. To develop sufficiency, we need methods. We need support to find. We can find this support and these methods in networks. Grenoble is a member of France Urbaine, European project as SONNET, and also Energy Cities network, and other networks may engage in the climate action, for example. And the last figure, the last illustration, we want to find a path, and the main issue is to reduce from 11 tons equivalent CO2 per year and per person. We have to go to 2 tons in 1950. We know that collective action is preponderant. In red, we can see that in transport, or also goods and service, housing, we have to decarbonize, and the sufficiency is very essential. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you both very much for presenting that information. We also have a slide here with more information, and we can make this available so that people have ready access to these links. But this just gives you a bit of an overview of some of the links that people can check out. So we're going to be starting the discussion section in a moment. I've already written down a few questions that I have for our speakers, and we've also received several questions in the question section for our speakers. But to get things started, especially as you start to think up some of your questions, I'd like to launch another poll, which is we're really focusing, at least through this discussion, on the case of Grenoble. But we know from your registrations that many of our attendees come from vastly different contexts. So I'm curious to hear, both when we're considering policy and when we're considering these smaller scale projects like the Sonnet City Lab, do you see this concept of energy sufficiency being relevant, being feasible, being something you can push forward in your context as well? And to simplify things, when we talk about energy sufficiency, we're talking about not only reducing or not only making our products more energy efficient, but also questioning whether we need to consume those products or services in the first place, and if we can consume less and still have a sufficient amount of consumption to meet our needs. So about half of our participants have now voted. I'll just wait one more moment. I've already seen a few people have said that it's not relevant, and I may come back to you in the question period because I'd be very curious to dig a bit deeper into what contextual information and what context can make this topic something that can either be really important or really not seem relevant at all, depending on context. So now we have, most people have voted, so I'm going to share the results now. And I find it quite interesting and exciting to see that regardless of the fact that we come from vastly different countries and contexts, there definitely seems to be an overwhelming majority who see this as a relevant policy driver and potentially also relevant locally. But again, I'd be very curious to hear from those who do not see it as relevant to maybe try to decide what we can do to make this a concept that can be applied more globally in a variety of contexts. Now, I have a few questions I've written down, and we've also gotten several in the chat. I think what I'll begin with, though, is that I already, before this discussion began, mentioned to Fabien and to Monsieur Fristeau that I'm curious about the national level. So I'd like to pitch that question first, since you've both already prepared for it and prepared a slide of information. But for some background for those who are on the line, this March, the National Assembly in France voted to include climate protection in France's very constitution. So I think it's quite clear when we look at that there's some drive from the national level to take climate action seriously and push it forward in a serious way. So my question to our speakers is, well, twofold really. What kind of supports are you already getting from the national level? But also what might you need from the national level in order to really bring these concepts forward and to make climate action something that's impactful in the way that we need it to be?
I can start if you. I can start to answer if you want. So for the national level, I would say that for let's say there are several legal texts that are encouraging organizations, communities, companies to integrate sufficiency into their actions, like for buildings, for awareness, for food, goods and services, for travels. But for now, it's more promotion, encouragement than regulations. So we don't have, for the moment, really regulation like bans or redirection with funding and subsidies. I mean, maybe we can. We hope that it will change soon, because this law project Adrien, you mentioned. I mean, maybe it will. It's this climate resilience law project. Maybe it will be a start, let's say, for us. But for the moment, there were already a lot of objectives in the past, but without really strong regulations, I would say. And it's more that in the law for buildings, we have to take into account the energy sufficiency, but without saying how, with which method, and I suppose also this subject is not really in the political national guidelines, because it confronts to progress, to economical growth. So maybe it's because of this main contradiction that it's quite a sensitive and difficult subject. And I would also add that local communities cannot act on all those topics, because they cannot decide everything about what any one of us can buy or cannot buy. They can act on their competencies on the territorial scale.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point about economic growth, because of course, if we're talking about reducing consumption, I think that you can see how that would very quickly become kind of a complex situation to try to approach given economic growth. Monsieur Fristeau, do you like to add anything to this question before we move on to the next question?
Yes. I think it's only words, sufficiency, resilience of politicians in national level, but we know and we do that here on ground in the cities. It's very interesting subjects, methods to implement transition on the city levels. But the climate law is still underway, and we will see. But I think it will be very strong in goals. It's not in us. We know that already.
All right, I see that we already have one participant who's raised their hand. I'm going to just unmute you now so that if you would like to state your question out loud, you can feel free to do so. So this is Perrine Fouret, who I've just now unmuted. Hopefully you're able to connect to audio.
Hello everybody, I'm Perrine from the city of Grenoble. I just wanted to add a few words on the European Green Capital Award, just to say that we were very proud of being the next European Green Capital, and that it will be a way for us to stepping up transition. And this is very important what Vincent Fristeau said about these cross-cutting issues. And this is for us, you know that the competition is about 12 topics, from waste to energy, but also adaptation, mitigation, and so on. I'm sure that everyone around the screen know that, but the cross-cutting issues and this is very this comprehensive transition strategy is very important for us, and it's not easy to go with all these cross-cutting issues. That's just one thing that I would add to the presentation of Mr. Fristeau and Vincent. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you very much. Now we have about 8 or 9 questions in the chat, and I also have a question to propose. So I'm just going to simply start from the top and work my way down. So the first question, Fabien, is for you. The question is whether you already have an estimate about the potential for energy savings through the measures that are really being put forth via Sonnet, and if so, if there's any Sonnet-related measures that seem to have a particularly big potential.
I mean, for the moment, we haven't. I mean, it's too soon for the Sonnet actions that are in progress, because we have to. I mean, we have planned to compare the, let's say, a year energy consumption for 1 year of a building before and after the action, but we will try to do it, but I would say that on previous diagnosis and individualized support, we could reach 10 to 15% of energy consumption for some methods that are close to those methods we are trying in Sonnet. But I think those results really depend on on what you can do in a building, because sometimes even if this energy sufficiency approach could be useful for users, but more for their other practices like food, travels, but you won't be able to measure those results. But for energy consumption, it really depends on the quality of building at this moment, and what you can do directly, for example, some adjustment on the regulation for heating, and some smaller work on whip operations on the building. So it really depends on the context. But to evaluate the actions, the sonnet actions, we are trying also to evaluate them more like qualitatively. I don't know if you see what I mean, but more to ask participants and people involved with questionnaires and interviews when we started the actions, at which level of responsibility or awareness they are, and try to also interview them, or we ask them the same questions at the end to see if there is any progress. So we are working on this topic with Grenoble École de Management, who are helping us to do it.
Great, excellent. This next question is a bit about, with respect to energy sufficiency, we're talking a lot about individual action and individual behavior change. And as soon as we talk about individual change, we also have to talk about justice, as you already have, about, you know, who's going to suffer the most from these individual changes. And I'm curious, Monsieur Christo, if there's any policy-related efforts in Grenoble to try to make sure that energy sufficiency doesn't come at the expense of increasing inequality.
I didn't understand the end of the question.
My apologies. I'm happy to repeat and to slow down. I have a tendency to speak quickly. My question is whether there's anything structurally in Grenoble to try to make sure that energy sufficiency and reducing energy consumption does not increase inequality in the city.
I think no. If we reduce energy consumption, it's we can win. For example, air quality. You can find other the noise in the city. For example, if you reduce the speed of transports, speed of cars, security too. So it's global actions at individual level or collective level, which can give a better life in the cities, I think.
But I can add something. There is also, for this subject of inequalities in energy consumption, there is also a project in Grenoble for energy, as an energy poverty platform, who is led by several actors, and Grenoble is also part of this project. So also the main goal is to help people who are in poverty to reach also a level of comfort that could be acceptable or desirable. Because I also agree with this question of inequalities, because for example, in Europe, we know that the top 1% of the highest incomes are emitting on average of 55 tons CO2 per year. So, okay, when we talk about eco-responsibility, we don't have to do all the same effort, because for this top 1%, they have to divide by 27 to align with the objective of 2 tons. But some people some inhabitants in Europe are emitting a lot, are emitting really less, but because they don't have the incomes, or they don't have this level of life. So I think those actions about, for example, about energy poverty, or other actions on territories to help people to afford some quality food and local food, can act on this level of reducing inequalities at the same time.
Great, that's interesting. I think that it's, yeah, perhaps then we've already mentioned how measures have to be integrated. That was mentioned by I apologize, I don't remember the name of the person from Grenoble who raised her hand and who spoke to us. And I think that this is also another example of that, integrating the measures together to ensure that we have both energy justice as well as energy sufficiency targeted at once. I'm going to go back to some of the questions that were proposed in the chat, and also a reminder to participants that if you'd prefer to ask your question yourself, you can always raise your hand to do so. There's a question here about whether there are any other cities that you know of that are approaching this idea of energy sufficiency as opposed to only energy efficiency.
I can answer something that I mean, when I started to work on energy sufficiency for Grenoble, I did a short investigation with 10 or 15 local communities in France, and but it was really focused on what those local communities are doing with their associations using their buildings. But I also asked them what kind of energy sufficiency actions they are doing for their city buildings. So I would say most big cities are doing something for sure, but generally it's more like eco-gesture displays, information on internal information on intranet, and generally it's carried out by someone who is already working on like a project manager who is already working on ecological or environmental transition, but it's not the only topic this person is working on. So and there are some exceptions. I remember about the city of Bordeaux or Lille, I think, who have more structured action to have a support to work with association and propose them something like a group project with monthly meetings and focused informations on several smaller topics like digital, like lightning, like I don't know, water, etc. to work on their awareness. But when I was asking those let's say those local communities what they do on with associations, I couldn't find anything more structured, and it was only several exceptions, let's say. So I think it's really a subject of it seems to be quite a, let's say, a young subject, and in some networks I also participate. A lot of let's say a lot of project managers are wondering, are trying to progress and are wondering the same things, that how to go to the next level and stop to do individualized support, one-off actions, because they are in lack of human means and human time.
Yeah, and I think related to that, especially in cases where energy sufficiency and energy efficiency are dealt with by the same project manager, how exactly do you conceptualize the difference? So there was a specific question in the chat about what about the Grenoble actions are specifically sufficiency as opposed to energy saving. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about how you draw that distinction and where you draw the line between energy saving action and energy sufficiency action.
I think energy efficiency, it's a technical approach, technical goals and investments. So we have dedicated teams to address this kind of issues for increase efficiency. For sufficiency, it's not, it's Fabien here, the supporter manager, and it's a more social, more involved action to spread a message, good practices, and it's not the same for city policies. But it's very important too. As I mentioned, with the Biennale of City in Transition, we exposed examples. We showed that actions make sense. It's very important to act with the sense of actions.
I would also add that the technical teams Vincent Fristo was talking about, there are dozens of employees who are working for the city to do the maintenance of heating, ventilation systems in buildings, and are following also consumptions on a daily rhythm. And also on my perspective of project manager about sufficiency, I'm also in my discourse saying that we should accelerate and act more on, let's say, on the organization level. But on another side, we also have the opportunity to have at least someone who can focus on this topic, because in other cities, those persons can focus really less on this topic, and it's only a small part of their job. So yeah, at least, let's say generally, I consider that most organizations are really have a gap and are late on this topic, but let's say we are progressing.
Yeah, sure. And there's a question here that I think relates to that quite well. As we talk about progressing to try to take up energy sufficiency in a more deliberate way, are there any specific actions that either of you would recommend to help establish an energy sufficiency plan and to help bring energy sufficiency really into planning and policy? Some initial first steps that could be taken.
Yeah. For me, I would say that if you have in your organization, let's say, an administration plan or administration project, which is defining some managerial values or global objectives of the organization, try to convince your general direction or your elected representatives that this that eco responsibility, like that low carbon approach, should be something like central in this project, because I think in this kind of main let's say global administration projects, when it's written, you will have to give results. So different departments in your organization will have to give some indications of, okay, what are you doing on this topic? What could you do those last 2-3 years? For me, it will be the first advice, and the second one would be to bring and try to collect all eco gesture or guidelines already existing in several databases on this subject, and try to build your own one, and to, let's say, to spread it and to transfer it by different channels or different networks. Yeah. For me, it would be the two first steps.
Yeah, sure. And Monsieur Fristo, from the political perspective, is there anything else you'd like to add about how to adopt sufficiency?
In sufficiency, I would speak about public lighting. You can do large savings with reduction of intensity of light. It's a first step, I think, in sufficiency, because you adapt the real level intensity of light with the use, in the middle of night, you can reduce by 70% of the intensity. It's a very important savings. So it's easy to do, and it could be a first step, I think.
Yeah, there's an expression in English about a low-hanging fruit. So a good first step is to do the easy things that can be done without too much difficulty and opposition and complexity. And I think that could be a very good example of that. We have quite a few other really interesting questions in the chat. However, I do want to move on to our final speaker to ensure we have enough time to get through everything. So what I would suggest is Fabien and also Monsieur Fristeau, if you guys are comfortable, perhaps you could put email addresses or contact information, or even the Sonnet info@sonnet-energy address in the chat, so that for those individuals who have not had their questions answered, they can follow up with you if needed. So on that note, I'm going to pass the floor over to Arthur, who is a colleague of mine at ECLA Europe and also an energy expert and someone who works on the PowerPort project. And this is a bit of a tradition in our SONNET Webinar Series that rather than getting the moderator to summarize some of the key points of discussion for the last few minutes, we try to bring in someone who's working on a different energy project so that we can get a different perspective and also hear a little bit about the relevance outside of our Sonnet bubble. So I'd like to hand the floor over to Arthur now, who has just 2 slides and a short intervention to help us wrap our heads around what we've learned throughout this webinar.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adrienne, and thank you, Lisa and Fabien, for the excellent presentations, very insightful. As Adrienne mentioned, I now have the great pleasure of giving us a quick wrap-up of today's discussion and making the connection to another topic. And I would like to continue and actually connect specifically to the point of inequality and how that relates to energy sufficiency. And I will address it a little bit from the perspective of tackling energy poverty. Before that, let me quickly recap what we've discussed today. So obviously, this topic of energy sufficiency is relatively new, generally speaking, but we were quite pleased to see that in general, most of you had quite some experience with this topic already. We had a good overview, I think, of what this exactly means: sufficiency of use of different appliances, sufficiency in dimensions, different things can be dimensions, how big your car is or everything, but also how we can approach this aspect of sufficiency. It's like that it's supposed to be approached more from a cooperation, an integrated angle, rather than just focusing on individual action. That was very interesting. We saw that in Grenoble there is a very good, it's very well embedded into the overall policies of the city, and that there's a strong system in place for daily monitoring of energy usage, all within the overall heading of arriving at carbon neutrality by 2040. And of course, it's going to be very important to think about how can energy sufficiency contribute to that, while ensuring that we can address at the same time this, the issue of inequality and the issue that there might be winners. And often we talk about the fact that there's winners and there's losers with regard to these kind of endeavors. And here we have to be a little bit careful because, as I will link to in a second, we have, of course, also the project of energy poverty to deal with. We saw very good examples of what exactly energy sufficiency can mean, talking about behavioral change, that there needs to be nudges that is being done always, but always a little bit with the idea in the background that we don't want to really offend anyone. So here really in the long run, long-term and political action is needed also from the national level to drive this concept forward. We saw that not only is social psychology very important, but also it is very important to facilitate the connection between different departments on the municipal level, to avoid silo thinking and to really approach this concept of energy sufficiency in an integrated manner. We saw there's of course a lot of barriers still. There's cultural issues. There's the issue of poor energy efficiency of buildings in general. There's a lack of means to address these things. Here I will touch upon in a second as well, what we can offer from the PowerPort perspective. But also it's very important that in order to facilitate energy sufficiency into overall managerial processes, it will be important to have relay persons who can drive this forward within their local government, for instance. And it's also very important to look at energy sufficiency not only from individual action, as I already mentioned, but really look at it as a collective endeavor and to really make it part of the city's plan to achieve carbon neutrality. And here, of course, making it a part of the city's energy and climate plans, or CCAPs, is very, very important. We've seen that, of course, in Grenoble, it's part of a greater roadmap for transitions, and there's a clear understanding that we need to tackle this from a collective perspective. But let me now quickly make the connection between energy sufficiency and this topic of inequality, and the fact that it's often being said that the issue with tackling energy sufficiency is related to how we look at general GDP growth. So this might be a real challenge to address in the long run. And we understand, of course, that we have to save energy efficiency. We have to think about saving energy efficiency even before we talk about being more efficient. So here, perhaps we can long run go from an energy efficiency first principle to perhaps an energy sufficiency first principle. That could be very interesting to explore in the future. And let me approach this now again from the inequality perspective. So we've seen that a lot of this is about energy consumption, of course, but we generally face a societal question of how energy can be distributed more fairly, bearing, of course, in mind that there's certain group of the population that is using too much energy or electricity in the first place, and there's a certain group of people that are even struggling to have access to the bare minimum, or that are struggling to make ends meet at the end of the month because they can't afford to pay their electricity bills. And here I would like to make the connection to energy poverty specifically and introduce you to the Power Poor concept, which is another European project where we're trying to tackle energy poverty in European cities to make it an essential part of how cities look at energy. And quickly introducing here the concept, energy poverty is understood as a situation where a household cannot meet its domestic energy needs. So of course, we need to think also here very much about, we've got different appliances in the household. Does the household need to use certain appliances in the first place? But the fundamental principle and problem is deeper. Energy poverty refers to the fact that the lives of these people that suffer from energy poverty is are really impacted, their well-being is impacted, and individuals who are unable to meet their basic energy needs are prevented from fully participating in society. This is also very important to consider from an energy sufficiency point of view, of course. If you could go to the next slide, please. Yes, thank you very much. So what exactly do we do then to tackle this issue from the Power Poor perspective? So as I already mentioned, and was discussed by the two excellent presentations before, it's very important to tackle this topic from a collective perspective, to make it part of the city's planning. And not only have individual actions, but approach it from an organizational point of view, involving many different stakeholders, and also making this distinction between energy efficiency as a technocratic approach, perhaps, and energy sufficiency as a societal approach. And the latter one is also something that energy poverty really, tackling energy poverty is very much related to. Within the framework of the Power Poor project, we want to solve energy poverty and tackle energy poverty through collective action, not only making it part of the city's CCAP, but concretely suggesting options how collective energy action or how collective action in the energy sector can contribute to alleviating energy poverty. So specifically talking about energy cooperatives, crowdfunding, and seeing how that can contribute to alleviating energy poverty through more individual actions, such as household visits, looking at households' energy consumption, giving individual advice. There is a clear possibility for the local government, for instance, to facilitate the creation of using crowdfunding schemes, creation of energy cooperatives, to provide energy to those who struggle to afford it in a cheaper manner, backed by many different people in society who want to contribute to this. In this sense, the Power Poor project adds different services, some of which might also be interesting to Grenoble, such as tools to analyze the energy costs and the energy bills of individual households, tools about what kind of financing options are available to contribute to alleviate energy poverty, how can cooperatives be used, how can crowdfunding schemes be used, yeah, and also actually carrying out a broader initiative to alleviate energy poverty through collective action in different European countries. So all in all, I think a lot of attention will be on behavioral change as well. It will be about making energy poor citizens try to understand the energy usage and trying to make them, of course, also aware about the importance of energy efficiency. But here, introducing the concept of energy sufficiency can help just as much. Really would like to stress that these two concepts are very much interrelated. So thanks again for very interesting presentations. And from the PowerPoint perspective, we will be very keen to take Grenoble's experience on energy sufficiency, first integrate it into how we look at tackling energy poverty. Adrian, thank you.
Thank you very much, Arthur. I think that was a really excellent summary of what we've discussed, and also really bringing everything back to this idea that we need integrated approaches, and we need approaches that consider all of these different components. I'm going to take these last 2 minutes to say, firstly, a very big thank you to all of our attendees and also to our speakers. We have a feedback form because we do still have a few more webinars, and we would love to hear your input about what you liked and what you didn't. So please, we do invite you to fill that in, and you will also receive that by email. But thank you very much for your excellent questions and participation. If this is something you're interested in, Sonnet has a new application that's just launching on our channels today and has already been launched by one of our partners. It's an opportunity for anyone working in social innovation to take on a full day workshop where we'll go through power dynamics and how power relates to social innovations and relates to your work, and how by better understanding power dynamics, you can increase the impact of your work. So please keep your eye open on our feeds because we will be launching that application very shortly. So thank you all very much. And as always, please feel free to stay in touch with us. And yeah, we look forward to hearing from you and to staying connected. Bye, everyone. Thanks a lot.